You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we review the first test match between England and New Zealand from Lords. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's have a look at the match summary from the first test match between England and New Zealand from Lords. New Zealand won the toss and batted first and made 378 all out in their first innings. Devon Conway top scored with 200 and Ollie Robinson took 4 wickets for England. England in reply in their first innings, all out for 275. Rory Burns top scored with 132 and Tim Southey took 6 wickets for New Zealand. New Zealand in their second innings, 6 for 169 declared. Tom Latham top scored with 36 and Ollie Robinson took 3 wickets for England. England in their second innings, chasing 273 to win, finished on 3 for 170. Dom Sibley top scored with 60 not out and Neil Wagner took 2 wickets for New Zealand. The match was a draw and Devon Conway was named man of the match. What were the key moments and key factors from this first test match between England and New Zealand from Lords? New Zealand's batting in the first innings was a key factor to them getting into a good position in this test match, scoring 378, thanks to Devon Conway, who scored 200 on test debut. The other key factor in this match was the rain, washed out day 3 to take some time out of the test match. New Zealand's bowling was another key factor to keep England to 275 all out in their first innings, which gave them a lead of 103 runs heading into the second innings. New Zealand were able to declare their second innings on 6 for 169 to set England 273 to win and try and force a result in this test match after rain washed out day 3. England's batting was a key factor in them drawing the test match. They batted out for a draw to finish on 3 for 170 as their chances of winning the match were slim. Those were the key factors and key moments that led to this first test match between England and New Zealand at Lords to be a drawn match. Let's have a look at some of the key stats from this first test match at Lords between England and New Zealand. James Anderson equalled Sir Alistair Cook's record for the most caps by an England test player with 161. If he plays at the next test match in Edgbaston, he will become England's most capped test player of all time. James Bracey became the 698th test player for England. Ollie Robinson became the 699th test player for England. Devon Conway became the 281st test player for New Zealand. Devon Conway became the 12th New Zealander to score a test century on debut. The other 11 players to do it are Jackie Mills versus England in 1930, Bruce Taylor versus India in 1965, Rodney Redmond versus Pakistan in 1973, Mark Greatbatch versus England in 1988, Matthew Sinclair versus the West Indies in 1999, Lou Vincent versus Australia in 2001, Scott Styris versus the West Indies in 2002, Kane Williamson versus India in 2010, Hamish Rutherford versus England in 2013, James Neesham versus India in 2014, and Tom Blundell versus the West Indies in 2017. Devon Conway's 200 was the highest ever score on test debut at Lords, surpassing the previous best of 131 by Sourav Ganguly. Devon Conway became the 6th player on test debut at Lords to score a century at the home of cricket. The 5 other batsmen to do it are Sourav Ganguly with 131 in 1996, Matt Pryor 126 not out in 2007, Andrew Strauss 112 in 2004, Harry Graham, 107 in 1893. John Hampshire, 107 in 1969. 5 players have scored a century in their maiden innings in tests before Conway. 7 players have a double century on debut in tests. Kyle Myers, 210 not out from the West Indies, was the latest. Conway is the oldest of the 7 players with a double century on debut at 29 years and 329 days. 2 openers have scored a double century on test debut, Conway being one of them, and Sri Lanka opener Brendan Korupal scored 201 against New Zealand in 1987. Conway batted for 578 minutes for his 200 off 347 balls, the second longest innings on Test debut in terms of minutes. Sri Lanka opener Brendan Karopal stood for 777 minutes at the crease for his 201 in 1987. Conway's 200 is the highest score on Test debut in England. He surpassed England batsman Ranchi's record of 154 not out against Australia in 1896 at Old Trafford. 52.91% of New Zealand's runs were scored by Conway, the second highest contribution in the maiden innings in Tests. Charles Bannerman's 165 not out in the first ever Test match turned out to be 67.34% of Australia's 245, which is also the highest ever contribution made to a completed innings in Tests. 3 players from New Zealand have converted their maiden Test century into a double century, including Conway against England. Matthew Sinclair and Martin Donnelly converted his only Test century to 206 at Lord's in 1949. 2003, the last time an opener scored a double century against England in Test cricket before Conway at Lord's. Graham Smith's 259 in 2003, also at Lord's, was the last time. Only one player has scored a double century for New Zealand in Tests on English soil before Conway. Martin Donnelly scored 206 in 1949. Nathan Astor's 222 and BJ Watling's 205 are the only other players to score a double century for New Zealand against England. 3 openers have batted till the fall of the 10th wicket in an innings on Test debut before Conway. Jack Barrett against England in 1890 and Pelham Warner against South Africa in 1899 both carried their bat in their team's second innings, while Kepler Wessels was the 10th wicket to fall in Australia's first innings during his Test debut against England in 1982. Javed Oman also carried the bat in the second innings on his Test debut against Zimbabwe in 2001, but the last batter was absent hurt. Those were the key stats from the first Test match between England and New Zealand from Lord's. Let's have a look at England's team performance in this first Test match. We'll start with their batsmen. Burns 132 and 25, Sibley 0 and 60 not out, Crawley 2 and 2, Root 42 and 40, Pope 22 and 20 not out, Lawrence 0 and Bracey 0. That's how the England batsmen performed in this first Test match. England's batting was okay in this match. It wasn't great, but it was okay. They managed to get to 275 in their first innings, but it wouldn't be England without a batting collapse, which happened in their first innings. Rory Burns and Joe Root's partnership of 93 for the third wicket. After that partnership was broken, England were 3 for 111, but then they were all out for 275. But the partnerships of 63 for the 7th wicket between Burns and Robinson, 52 for the 10th wicket between Burns and Anderson, rescued England and got them back to that 275 score. Also, Rory Burns' century of 132 kept England together in their first innings. Not the job of the lower order to get most of the runs. It's up to the top order to score the runs and build big partnerships. But we did not see that from England in this first innings. England, if they batted better, then they would have been a lot closer to New Zealand's first innings score and could have really put New Zealand under pressure in this Test match. They lost wickets at regular intervals in that first innings, 1 for 4, 2 for 18, 3 for 111, 4 for 140, 5 for 140, 6 for 140, 7 for 203, 8 for 207, 9 for 223, and 275 all out. The partnerships in that first innings were poor as well. 4, 14, 93, 29, 0, 0, 63, 4, 16, and 52. Going forward for England, they need to back up partnerships when they lose a wicket, and they need big partnerships as well to put themselves into a good position. Otherwise, if they don't, they could struggle to score runs and win games of cricket going forward. Some of the batsmen in the first innings played some reckless shots and gave their wickets away in that first innings, like Zach Crawley and Dan Lawrence did, which was disappointing for them, obviously. England's second innings batting was more disciplined compared to their first innings, finishing on 3 for 170. Because England knew their chances of winning the game was slim, they didn't want to have another batting collapse in the second innings, so they batted with some discipline and responsibility with their batting. If Stokes and Butler were in this side, then they would have gone for the win. But obviously, without them in the side and with this fragile, inexperienced batting order from England, they didn't want to risk losing the game to win it. And that's why they batted more conservatively and they sort of shut up shop and just batted for a draw in this test match. So that's what England did in the second innings, and that was their approach. But people were criticising England's approach to the second innings. Well, you've got to think about it this way. You've got to think about the long-term prospects because you've still got another test match to go at Edgbaston. And if England were going to go all guns blazing and trying to get these runs like in one-day cricket style, for example, then they would have had a batting collapse. This inexperienced batting order would have crumbled, would have had a collapse, would have been bowled out cheaply, and they would have lost this test match and they would have been 1-0 down in the series. But seeing that there was another test match to go at Edgbaston, they wanted to bat for the draw, make sure we just get some time in the middle, make sure other players get some time scoring runs in the middle, and obviously look forward to Edgbaston and trying to win that test match. So I think people need to think about the long-term picture as well. And that's how England went down that route of batting conservatively and just batting for the draw. Excuse me. Joe Root after the match said, we need to be more disciplined as a batting lineup, especially in the first innings. And he's right. Joe Root is right. In the second innings, England did bat with discipline, but in the first innings, they didn't, which is the problem with this England side. It's the inconsistency with this England batting. And that's the problem with this England side is they can't back up performances. They're not consistent enough. So Joe Root wants this side to play with a sense of responsibility and a sense of discipline in their batting. And that's what this England side need to do. Joe Root is calling it out there. He's saying we're not disciplined enough. And he's right. This England side is not disciplined with their batting. What we saw in the first innings with the batting collapse was poor. It wasn't disciplined because batsmen like Crawley and Lawrence played rash shots. Batsmen got in and got out. Lack of partnerships, losing wickets at regular intervals doesn't show that the batting unit is batting with discipline and purpose. And Joe Root wants that from his team. So the challenge for this England team is to build that consistency. Let's hope for them, for the second test match, they can bat with a bit more discipline and a bit more purpose and, get some runs and put England into a good position. Some of the batsmen in this England side, I want to talk about them. Their spots are not certain in this England side. I'm talking about Rory Burns, Dom Sibley, Zach Crawley and Dan Lawrence, Ollie Pope and James Bracey. Their spots are not certain in this England batting lineup. Let's start with Rory Burns. I thought he batted well for his 132, but one century doesn't make a summer. He needs to score runs on a consistent basis throughout this English summer to cement his spot in this England test side. He did well, Rory Burns, coming back after being dropped from the India series. He came back here, first test match against New Zealand. He scored 132, which was good for his confidence. Now he needs to go on with this and be consistent. The same with Dom Sibley. Got out for a duck in the first innings, made 60 not out in the second innings. That would definitely boost his confidence. Same as Rory Burns. He needs to seize this opportunity now, Dom Sibley. Make it count. Grab it with both hands and score runs on a consistent basis. And tell the selectors, pick me because I'm the guy for the job. That's what he needs to do, Dom Sibley. The biggest disappointment for me was Zach Crawley. Disappointing from him in this test match. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to be honest. He's not a number 3 batsman. Not a number 3 batsman. You can't score 4 runs in this test match and be a number 3 batsman. He scored 2 and 2 in this test match. It's not good enough, Zach Crawley. Not good enough. He hasn't got many opportunities left, Zach Crawley, to prove to the selectors, well, obviously to prove to Joe Root and Chris Silverwood because they're the selectors now because they got rid of the selectors, England. So Chris Silverwood and Joe Root are the selectors now. Zach Crawley has to prove to them that he's worth something in this test side. I don't think he's a number 3 batsman because he's playing reckless shots. He's not putting a high price on his wicket. We saw that in both innings in this test match. He played reckless shots and he played poorly. It's just not good enough. It's pathetic. I know that's a strong word, but it's pathetic. You're batting at number 3 for England and you play reckless shots like that, there's no responsibility about his batting. There's no sense of purpose. There's no sense of putting a high price on his wicket. What I saw from him, he didn't fight. There was no fight in Zach Crawley. He was just lazy. And that's just not good enough for a number 3 in Test cricket. He's averaging 30 in Test cricket, and averaging 30 at number 3 is not good enough. You need to get someone else in there. So I think Joe Root needs to move him down the order. I think probably have him at number 5 or number 6, and probably put up Pope or Lawrence up to number 3. Maybe James Bracey up to number 3, because Bracey bats at number 3 for Gloucestershire, and he's done quite well. So maybe you could change things around there. But Zach Crawley, it's just not good enough from him. He needs to do better. This is a big summer for him. He needs to score runs consistently. His spot is not certain. His spot's actually in doubt. If he has another low-scoring test match at Edgbaston, I'm afraid to say it, but he could be out of this side. So his spot is definitely in doubt. Same with Dan Lawrence. His spot is in doubt. He played a reckless shot when he got out in the first innings for a duck. Not putting a high price on his wicket. Same with Zach Crawley. Not many opportunities for Dan Lawrence to prove his case to be selected for England. Certainly for the Test series against India, but also for the Ashes series later on this year. Because he's running out of opportunities and he's wasting those opportunities, just like Zach Crawley. They've got talent, Crawley and Lawrence, but they're wasting that talent. They're just throwing the talent away. They can't do that. They're talented players. They need to knuckle down and work hard. Ollie Pope, he scored some runs in this test match, 22 and 20 not out, but they weren't big runs, and his spot is not certain in this side. He needs to score runs on a consistent basis because he hasn't been doing that for England for a long period of time. His spot is definitely in doubt. James Bracey's spot as keeper in this team is in doubt as well, obviously coming in to replace Ben Foakes ahead of this New Zealand series after Ben Foakes was injured. When Josh Buttler returns to this side, he will definitely take the gloves off Bracey. Now, James Bracey, I thought he kept well in this test match, but he fumbled a few takes with the gloves. Not used to the excessive wobble the ball has here at Lord's, the most at any ground in England. Lack of keeping experience at first-class level as well for Bracey, so he hasn't kept, all that much in first-class cricket, which is a real concern, obviously. It sort of showed in the keeping here at Lord's, that inexperience showed in the keeping. But if England want him to be in this side still, now Bracey bats in the top order for Gloucestershire, so that if Buttler comes back, takes the gloves, and if they want Bracey to be in the side but as a batsman, he may bat in the top order. So I think England may go with that option if they want to for the India series and potentially for the Ashes going long term. But Burns, Sibley, Crawley, Lawrence, Pope, and Bracey, their spots are not certain in this side. And especially for Burns, Sibley, Crawley, Lawrence and Pope, they're all averaging 30 in Test cricket. They've been inconsistent in their Test careers thus far. And this series against New Zealand and the series against India, and definitely this whole summer in England, is very important for them to stand up and start scoring runs for England. Otherwise, other batsmen waiting in the wings may take their spots, like Darwin Malan, Hamid, Mark Stoneman, Adam Lyth, James Vince may come back into the side and replace them. And England may consider bringing those players back if they want to go in another direction with their batting going forward. Also with Ben Stokes and Josh Buttler coming back into the side as well, along with Chris Wokes, Moeen Ali, Sam Curran to come back as well, Burns, Sibley, Crawley, Pope, Lawrence, their spots are definitely in doubt. They need to score some runs on a consistent basis and get on with the job of scoring runs for England, because if they don't, they could be out of this England Test side and other players may come in and take over. So overall, I thought England's batting was okay, but not great. There's a lot of areas to improve going forward. Let's have a look at England's bowlers and their performance in this match. Robinson took 7 wickets, Broad took 1 wicket, Wood took 4 wickets, Anderson took 2 wickets, and a wicket for Root. That's how the England bowlers performed in this first Test match at Lord's. I thought England bowled okay in this match. They bowled well at times in terms of their lines and lengths. They were consistent at times, and when they were consistent, their lines and lengths, they looked threatening with the ball. The ball was seaming and swinging, and they looked pretty threatening with the ball. At other times, they struggled with their consistency with their lines and lengths and leaked some runs, and that sort of didn't help them in terms of keeping the run rate down and keeping the pressure on New Zealand throughout the first innings of this Test match. But they did well to keep New Zealand to 378 in the first innings. At one stage, New Zealand were looking to get a score around about 400 plus, but when England broke the partnership of Conway and Nicholls for 174 for the 4th wicket, that pretty much sparked a bit of a batting collapse from New Zealand. They were 4 for 288, New Zealand, to be then bowled out for 378. So I thought England did a pretty good job to keep them to that number. And towards the end of day one, England were a bit poorly in the field in terms with the ball, and they were missing their lines and lengths and not being consistent. So to bounce back on day 2 to bowl New Zealand out for 378 was a great effort by them. I thought they bowled well in New Zealand's second innings. New Zealand were looking to declare and try to set up this Test match and force a result, which saw some quick scoring runs from New Zealand, and New Zealand declared on 6 for 169, which saw England take some wickets throughout the whole second innings from New Zealand. James Anderson and Stuart Broad bowled well in this match, but they didn't have the significant impact like they always have. It was England's change bowlers that did much of the work in this Test match, in Ollie Robinson and Mark Wood, which is a good sign for England going forward because Anderson and Broad will eventually retire, and it's a good sign that Robinson and Wood stood up and took some wickets in this Test match. What impressed me about Ollie Robinson was his determination, his resilience, his fight. He's been through a lot of stuff off the field of late, as we all know, but to channel that into his bowling was good. You know, he bowled a good line and length. He scored runs as well with the bat, scoring 42 runs, which were crucial in England's first innings. And he did a pretty good job on debut. So he's a very promising player for England going forward into the future for England. I thought Mark Wood bowled well. He had good pace in this Test match. He bowled pretty well. He took 4 wickets in this match, which was good. Joe Root used him well in short, sharp spells. And he's sort of that impact bowler. He's sort of an X-factor bowler, Mark Wood. He comes on for that burst of pace. If nothing's happening, Joe Root says, "You're coming on, Mark Wood." All right. You know, he's sort of that X-factor bowler. So that burst of pace where nothing's happening, he comes on to bowl, that pace, gets wickets, and that's what he did in this first Test match against New Zealand, which I thought he bowled pretty well. He could be useful for England in Australia in terms of the Ashes later on this year. And the thing with England, they need to really manage him well because Mark Wood has had a lot of injuries over the years, and if England want him for the Ashes later on this year, they need to manage his body well. And that's the question that England will need to ask themselves. How do we manage Mark Wood until the Ashes later on this year? So his workload has to be managed because he's a 3-format player. So I think he may be missing some games of cricket throughout this English summer to get his body right for that Ashes series later on this year. But good signs for England that they took some wickets, Robinson and Wood, in this Test match and contributed nicely to the bowling effort. Overall, England will be pleased with their bowling but disappointing with their batting in this Test match. They will be hoping that this inexperienced batting lineup can fire for the second Test match at Edgbaston and start to score runs and put England in a good position. Let's have a look at New Zealand's team performance in this first Test match at Lord's. Let's start with their batsmen. Latham, 23 and 36. Conway, 223. Williamson, 13 and 1. Taylor, 14 and 33. Nicholls, 61 and 23. Watling, 1 and 15 not out. And de Granholm, 0 and 9 not out. That's how New Zealand went about things as a batting unit in this first Test match. I thought New Zealand's batting in this first Test match was pretty good. They batted well, scoring 378 in the first innings. Devon Conway was the standout, scoring 200 on Test debut. His partnership of 174 with Henry Nicholls for the 4th wicket was crucial for New Zealand getting to that 378 score in the first innings. After that partnership was broken, New Zealand lost some wickets quickly as England were bowling well and keeping the pressure on in that first innings. New Zealand were 4 for 288 when Nicholls got out, to be then bowled out for 378. They lost wickets at regular intervals in that innings as well, 1 for 58, 2 for 86, 3 for 114, 4 for 288, 5 for 292, 6 for 293, 7 for 294, 8 for 317, 9 for 338, and 378 all out. The partnerships after that 174-run partnership between Conway and Nicholls were 4, 1, 1, 23, 21, and 40. Those wickets cost New Zealand getting a score of 400 plus in the first innings, but from where they were, those late order runs from the tail enders contributing nicely with Conway for the last 3 wicket partnerships helped New Zealand get to that 378 score, which was not a bad score on this Lord's surface. So I think going forward for New Zealand, they need to improve that side of their batting, not losing wickets in clumps and making sure they build partnerships and back up the partnerships as well. To me, it was just a lack of match practice heading into the first test against England. Getting back into the rhythm of test cricket takes a bit of time. New Zealand hasn't played a test match since January against Pakistan at home. All those factors contributed to that batting collapse in the first innings for New Zealand. I thought their second innings batting New Zealand was quite good. It was aggressive batting from New Zealand because they wanted to try and force a result in this test match, which I liked because New Zealand was still thinking about winning the game despite the rain on day 3, pretty much sealed the fate of this test match and it ended up being a draw. They lost wickets at regular intervals in that second innings as well. 1 for 39, 2 for 57, 3 for 74, 4 for 105, 5 for 133 and 6 for 159. But that didn't matter because New Zealand were trying to be aggressive to get quick runs and set England a total to chase down. Then they declared and set England 273 runs to win. So that's what I liked about New Zealand's batting in the second innings. Even though we lost a bit of time due to weather on day 3, they still wanted to win this test match and still wanted to, bat aggressively, try and set a total quickly so they can get out there and start bowling to England. They set them 273 to win, give themselves a chance to win the test match. That's what I liked about New Zealand in their second innings in terms of their batting. To me, the concern for New Zealand in this batting display in this test match was the performances of Kane Williamson and Ross Taylor. Both of them didn't have the impact that New Zealand would have hoped in this first test match. Williamson, to me, looked a bit out of touch and his rhythm was a bit lost in his batting. Ross Taylor looked a bit scratchy in the first innings, but he batted well in the second innings. Two of them are class players, and they should bounce back for the second test match at Edgbaston. But the positive sign for New Zealand is that even though they didn't perform well, other batsmen like Conway and Nicholls stood up, where Williamson and Taylor didn't really make the impact that they would have hoped. The innings of Conway and Nicholls really helped New Zealand get to that 378 score, whereas Williamson and Taylor struggled to find their rhythm and their timing with their batting. So that's great signs for New Zealand going forward for the next test against England at Edgbaston, but also the World Test Championship final against India. Let's talk about Devon Conway's innings. He was definitely the standout and the star batsman of this New Zealand batting lineup in this test match, scoring 200 on debut at Lord's. What a way to score your first test century and get your name on that honours board here at the home of cricket. One word to describe his batting: unbelievable. Unbelievable batting from Devon Conway. Looked like he played 100 tests and scored over 10,000 runs. Things I liked about his batting: he was composed, had fluency, timing and rhythm to his batting, looked natural and not robotic like some players do. His technique was simple, great patience and great balance at the crease. The one thing I was impressed about Conway was his mental application. His mental side of the game was outstanding. Making his debut at Lord's is a big occasion, but he handled it well, all thanks to his mental game. So how did his mental game help him in this innings? Well, it was down to his attitude, mindset and mentality. We talked about how the right attitude, mindset and mentality and how that can have an impact on your performance. And we talked about that when we did the cricket throwback on Amazing Adelaide. I wanted to mention it again with Devon Conway's batting and talk in depth about it. His attitude was the biggest contributing factor to his batting. Attitude, what is attitude? Attitude is the state of mind which you approach a situation or look at the world. Attitude is a choice between positive and a negative attitude. Attitude affects performance. Attitude is also internal and external. Internal attitude is how we think and how we feel. Our mindset. This is the voice inside that can send positive messages and reinforce positive behaviors, or it can eat away at our confidence. This can be emotionally and physically draining. External attitude is the way we communicate this mindset to others. Our behavior is the personification of our attitude. Now we know what attitude is, how did Conway apply this to his batting? The situation Conway was faced with was that New Zealand won the toss and were batting first, so he needed to score runs to make sure New Zealand were in a good position in this test match. Conway chose a positive attitude to his debut innings because attitude is a choice, and whichever one you choose, it will have an impact on your performance. Conway's internal attitude was telling him and sending him positive messages and reinforcing that to him. Conway's external attitude, the way he communicated his positive attitude to others, had a big effect on his teammates and Henry Nicholls in that partnership of 174 for the fourth wicket, because Nicholls saw that Conway was batting well and being positive, and that made him believe and be positive himself, which had an effect on Nicholls' performance. He went on to score 61. Conway's innings is an example of what the right attitude, mindset and mentality can do in terms of performance, because his approach to the situation he faced was a positive attitude, and it showed in his magnificent innings, because he believed in himself and knew what he can do, and wanted to approach his debut innings with a positive attitude and not a negative attitude. It showed in his innings, and it just shows us that if you approach the game of cricket with the right attitude, mindset and mentality, you can achieve anything and perform to the best of your ability. In finishing off about Devon Conway, he reminds me of Mike Hussey. Now, Michael Hussey got picked for Australia at around about 29-30, similar age to Devon Conway. Hussey made over 15,000 first-class runs before he played Test cricket for Australia. So Devon Conway's pathway to Test cricket is similar to Michael Hussey's pathway to Test cricket, because Devon Conway has played over 100 first-class games, scored over 7,000 runs and scored 19 centuries before he got selected to play Test cricket for New Zealand. Both him and Hussey are a similar age when they got chosen for to play Test cricket, I should say. They have done the apprenticeship, well-experienced players, they know their games and look like they belong at the Test level. And definitely Conway, in his first Test innings, he does look like he's a Test player for sure. If Conway can have a similar career to Hussey, then he will be one of New Zealand's great players, I think, because he's just got that feel about it, Devon Conway. If he can approach Test cricket like Mike Hussey did and play the way he's played in his first Test innings here at Lord's, then he's definitely going to be a very good Test player in years to come. Overall, it was a wonderful innings from Conway, and it's an innings he will remember forever. Let's have a look at New Zealand's bowlers and their performance in this Test match. 7 wickets for Southey, 3 wickets for Wagner, 3 wickets for Jamieson, no wickets for Satner, no wickets for de Granholm, and no wickets for Kane Williamson. That's how the New Zealand bowlers performed in this first Test match. I thought New Zealand bowled well in this Test match. They bowled good lines and lengths at times. Other times they were a bit inconsistent with their lines and lengths. Bowled well to keep England to 275 in their first innings. Towards the end of the England innings, New Zealand were a bit inconsistent with their lines and lengths and leaked runs, especially to the tail enders. Partnerships of 63 for the 7th wicket between Burns and Robinson, 52 for the 10th wicket between Burns and Anderson. Those partnerships got England within 103 runs of New Zealand in the first innings. Got their tactics wrong, New Zealand, to the tail enders, having the field back and not having the field up and in attacking positions to get wickets. So I think looking ahead to the second Test match, they need to get their tactics right to the tail enders, having the field up and in attacking positions, making sure they bowl consistent lines and lengths and treat the tail enders just like a top order batsman. So I think that's what New Zealand went wrong in this Test match, especially to England's first innings. They got the tactics wrong to the tail enders. So they need to get the tactics better to the tailenders going forward. I thought Tim Southee bowled well and led this New Zealand attack quite well, taking 6 for 43 in the first innings. The second time he's on the honours board here at Lords to go with his 10-wicket haul back in 2013. I thought Kyle Jamieson and Neil Wagner did well to support Southee in the pace department, took wickets and created pressure, and that brought about wickets for them and also wickets for New Zealand. I thought Colin de Grandhomme bowled well, even though he didn't take any wickets, but his consistency with his line and length was good, and he created that pressure which really tested the England batsmen. I thought Mitchell Santner was a bit disappointing, not really threatening as a test match spinner. He's not well known as a test match spinner, Mitchell Santner. He's more of a specialist in the limited overs format. So to me, he didn't really have the impact that New Zealand would have wanted from him in this first test match. But overall, I thought New Zealand bowled quite well in this test match, and there's a lot of positive signs for them in the bowling department going forward for the second test match at Edgbaston, but also into the World Test Championship final. Overall, New Zealand will be feeling confident after this draw. They played some good cricket in this test match, good signs with their bowling, taking wickets and putting England under pressure. They can make minor improvements to their bowling. Their batting was okay, but can make minor improvements to their batting as well. Let's preview the second test match of the series between England and New Zealand from Edgbaston. Talk about the potential 11s for both teams and who's going to win this second and final test match of the series. The head-to-head record at Edgbaston between England and New Zealand. Their first test match played here was back in 1958. They've played 4 matches here at Edgbaston. England have won all 4 of them. New Zealand have won none. Let's have a look at England's potential 11 for the second test match. I think they may go in with this 11. Burns, Sibley, Crawley, Root, Pope, Lawrence, Bracey, Leach, Wood, Broad and Anderson. Now we know Ollie Robinson has been suspended by the ECB due to his off-the-field misdemeanours. So we all know why he's suspended. We're not going to go into that. So Jack Leach may come in to replace him at Edgbaston for the second test match, because I think England may need a spinner at Edgbaston for the second test match. So I think Jack Leach to replace Ollie Robinson in the side. So England may go into the second test with that potential 11. Let's have a look at New Zealand's potential 11 for the second test match. Latham, Conway, Williamson, Taylor, Nichols, Watling, de Grandhomme, Jamieson, Southee, Patel and Bolt. Now, Trent Bolt was in doubt to play any part of this test series against England, but he was seen at Lords with the team training, so he may be a chance to play at Edgbaston. If he does, it will be good, because he needs a game of competitive test match cricket before that World Test Championship final against India. So he may come into the side, Trent Bolt, to replace Neil Wagner, which is a tough call on Neil Wagner, because Neil Wagner bowled well in this first test match, but if Trent Bolt's available, Neil Wagner has to come out for him. Trent Bolt has to play, because it's very important for New Zealand that he plays this game to get some good competitive test match cricket into his legs, especially some overs as well into the legs before that World Test Championship final. I think Asjaz Patel may come into the side to replace Mitchell Santner, because Mitchell Santner doesn't look threatening as a test match spinner. Asjaz Patel is the better spinner of the two, so he may come in to replace Mitchell Santner for the second test match. So New Zealand may go into the second test with that potential 11. Who's going to win this second test match and the final test match of the series at Edgbaston? I think New Zealand are going to win, because this New Zealand team are still the strongest side in this series. They played well at Lords, and their bowling looks threatening up against this inexperienced England batting lineup. And their batting is strong as well and can get big runs for New Zealand as well. So I think New Zealand to win this second test match at Edgbaston and to win the series overall. What do both teams need to do to improve heading into the second test match at Edgbaston? We'll start with England. What do they need to improve on heading into the second test match? Their batting. They need to back up partnerships with their batting in England, making sure they don't lose early wickets to prevent a batting collapse. Not playing reckless cricket shots and getting in and getting set as batsmen and scoring runs to put the team into a good position. Their bowling, they need to make sure that they bowl consistently with their lines and lengths for long periods of time to create that pressure with the ball. New Zealand, what do they need to do to improve heading into the second test match? They're batting New Zealand, making sure they don't lose wickets early to prevent a batting collapse, as we saw in the first innings of this first test match at Lords, making sure they back up partnerships and making sure they're big partnerships as well. With their bowling, they need to have better tactics to England's tail-enders, having the field up and in attacking positions, making sure they bowl consistent lines and lengths and treat the tail-enders just like a top-order batsman, also making sure they are consistent with their lines and lengths for long periods of time to create that pressure to the England batsmen. My thoughts on the test match: it was great to see people back at Lords enjoying and watching the cricket again. It was a shame that the rain we had on day 3 ruined what was going to be a great test match. Anyway, you can't control the weather, but let's hope we get a good competitive test match at Edgbaston, and may the best team win. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.